These 40 days of Lent here at Salt House, we want to put into practice a more honest spirituality. We'll do it by exploring a way of living that has led to remarkable healing and transformation, the kind Jesus taught us. It's a global movement fueled by humility and grace lived in beloved community that began in the 1930s. It's the 12-step recovery program, as articulated in the so-called Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. The 12 steps are a practical way for individuals in regular meetings and with the support of a sponsor to live and work through addiction. It began with alcohol, but today, these same 12 steps are used across the globe for dozens of addictions, from codependency to hoarding, compulsive eating to workaholism, as well as groups for family members and loved ones. These steps work. If you're newer to the 12 steps, here are 2 things you need to know about why we'd spend Sunday morning sermons exploring the 12 steps. First, the message of Jesus and the 12-step message are largely the same message, which we'll see each Sunday. The second, the 12 steps are for all of us because we all have our own substances and behaviors that we seek out to cope. They bind us, which is the root of the word addiction. We can become bound to lots of things. Food, control, we worry, we overwork, overplan, over everything. There's alcohol, pot, scrolling on our phones, shopping, sex, exercise, so many things. These things can be good to comfort, soothe, and help us, but they can cross a line when they become unhealthy for us. The New Testament calls them our demons, those things we reach for that have such control over our lives, our behaviors, and our actions. The 12 steps can be used for any unhealthy coping tool, anything that we use to avoid trauma or uncomfortable feelings. And it begins by admitting we are powerless. In step 1, I can't. Then we're open to a power outside of ourselves that will restore our sanity. In step 2, God can. In step 3, we make a decision to hand our lives over to the care of God. It's the moment of open-handed surrender. I think I'll let God. And then we keep dancing the open hand 3-step waltz of I can't, God can, I think I'll let God. As the steps 4 through 12 open us to vulnerable self-work, making amends for the harm we've caused, practicing prayer and contemplation, and a rigorous honesty with self for ongoing health. So friends, what binds you? What are your demons? What do you need to let go of? Let's open our whole selves to God now. For Lent at Salt House is I can't. Steps toward a more honest spirituality.
Good morning, Salt House. I can't tell if I'm having allergies or if it's just the Palm Sunday thing. Chris, you feel me? Yeah, I was pumping all the stuff this morning to make sure that we got through this sermon without hacking something up. Yeah, come. Yes. Well, good morning. Good morning. My name is Zach, and as you know, I'm a workaholic. And it's been a couple weeks, so I thought I'd just give you a check-in on how my addiction is going, like a little community accountability. It's my last quarter of seminary at ILIF, and the last couple of quarters have been crazy. When I was doing my internship at Harborview, I wound up dropping classes, and that did not feel great. And then last quarter, my mom had surgery, and my family had a funeral, and Ben and I did some travel, and I just felt like life was coming at me too fast, and I was not present to anything. I just wasn't spending any quality time with Ben. I wasn't calling my mom very often. I wasn't really doing anything with anyone outside of work and school. I wasn't even taking time for myself to slow down or exercise or sleep. So this last and final quarter, I figured it out. I've decided I've got this, and I'm going to beat this workaholic, go faster, faster, faster thing with a proven effective tool that I've used many times: Microsoft Excel. So before the quarter started, last Sunday, I made a spreadsheet. Do I have it? Here it is. Here it is. You can see it. I mean, look at this. I've got time scheduled for each class, and it's color-coded. I've got time scheduled for Salt House. I'm going to do some extra things at Harborview. There's time to exercise and go to therapy. I've even got laundry and dishes there in the bottom, so I don't forget. And my favorite, there's time to text Ben, because that's romantic. Little reminders. Time to call my mom. Maybe I'll even call my brother one of these days. There's 2 more days to put onto the spreadsheet. I've got it. And on Monday, I was like, no worries, I've got a spreadsheet for this. And then on Tuesday, I was getting out of the pool from swimming, which, as you can see, is an evening activity. And I was like, okay, time to go home and do laundry. I was like, well, this is exhausting. Like, this isn't it. Like, 48 hours in, I made this way worse. It's like, ugh, my way of doing it never works. And I burn myself out every single time. So I'm Zach, and I'm a workaholic. Hi. And this spreadsheet's a little hyperbolic, but it's not too far off because it captures how my brain works when I live out of this place of fear. Like when my fears of not being worthy, of not doing enough, not earning the love I seek, when those fears are running the show. So I've really loved this sermon series, allergies, because I've needed this sermon series. So let's recap. We've been looking at how the 12 steps are this road of surrender. The first 3 steps take us through this cycle of recognizing I can't, God can, I think I'll let God. And then steps 4 and 5 have us searching ourselves for how we contribute to our own chaos. And then telling someone about it. Like, ugh, that was intimidating stuff. And then steps 6 and 7 have us identifying our defects and shortcomings and turning them over to God. And then last week, Pastor Ryan took us through 8, 9, and 10, which were all about making amends with the people we've wronged. And have you noticed there's always kind of like this rhythm to the steps? Like there's always a get ready and then do the thing step. I kind of feel like the get ready part has been hard for me. So this week we're looking at step 11, just one step. I think it's the first week we've done one step. But don't worry, you'll still get your full Salt House 45-minute sermon experience. And it's fitting to talk about this step on Palm Sunday because step 11 is another step about surrender. And Palm Sunday is the beginning of Holy Week, which tells a week-long tapestry that tells a story of Jesus' surrender. And as we journey with Jesus to the cross, step 11 and the story of Holy Week actually have a lot in common. So I'm excited to explore this with you. So let's start with the story of Palm Sunday that we heard out in the lobby. When we find Jesus riding into Jerusalem, he's been in ministry for some time now, healing the sick, casting out demons, feeding crowds. Like the guy has a reputation. And when he arrives in Jerusalem, the people hail him as the Messiah, the king who would deliver them and restore Israel, the king who would drive out the Roman Empire, the king who would bring justice and peace to the land, ending the cycles of corruption and occupation. And they are chanting Hosanna, which means God save us. God save us. It's a pretty bold claim. And they throw their jackets and blankets on the ground, and they lay out these palm branches, and they pave the way into the capital city with grandeur and splendor, a little hoopla, if you will. And I hope you see the political intensity of this story, because this crowd that is forming in the capital, chanting "Save us" in the capital, declaring Jesus as the king in the capital, declaring that Jesus is God in the capital. I mean, the people expect a coup, and they've prayed for one. They've been waiting on this day of deliverance for generations, and now they think Jesus is the one. They think Jesus is going to overthrow Rome, lead the resistance, and restore the glory of Israel's monarchy and culture. I mean, if you aren't careful, that kind of thing will get you killed. But as we know from hearing this story year after year, the crowd is about to be terribly disappointed. The crowd is going to feel very foolish in just a few days. Like they will be absolutely hopeless by this time on Friday. Because the funny thing about God is, God rarely shows up in grandeur and splendor and hoopla. God is there, but prosperity isn't God's style. Empire isn't God's system. Military parades are not God's modus operandi. God shows up in scary, frightening, and broken places. In fact, that is normally where God does God's best work. But the crowd never gets this, right? Like Judas, out of fear that they're all in danger from Rome, cahoots with the elites to turn Jesus over to the Roman authorities. Peter, James, and John will not be able to sit with Jesus in his anguish. They'll fall asleep as he speaks of his fear and his grief. Peter will then cover his own ass and deny ever even knowing Jesus, and that's only after he picks up a sword and cuts off the ear of a soldier. The crowd will go from believing Jesus is a savior and a king to thinking he's a traitor who deserves to be executed. There are so many ways that this story speaks to us today, right? I mean, it's 2023. Think about this for a minute. Do you ever have a moment where you're like, I thought we were past this? Like, I thought society was better. I never thought that things could get so bad in my lifetime. Like, maybe you think about the pandemic, or queer rights, or ability issues, or racism, or indigenous rights, healthcare access, or maybe you think about work-life balance, or mental health, or something in your family. Things that the more we learn about how they get handled, the more we're like, oh, we thought we solved this. But actually, it's way worse than we realized. That is how the crowd is about to feel. But zooming in on our sermon series on the 12 steps, I think this story is actually a great way to think about addiction. The crowd shows us how foolish we can be sometimes. The crowd shows us how manipulated we are. The crowd shows us how powerless we are to our fears and our self-deceptions, how fickle we are. Like, the crowd shows us our addictions. Because like the crowd, we think we know what we need. The crowd thinks they need a military uprising. They think they need a coup. And they think they're going to manufacture their own salvation somehow. They see this good thing that God is doing, and they're like, we could make that a little better. And in the process, they kill God. And don't we do that sometimes? I mean, part of what we've talked about in this series is that addiction often starts with good things. Good things like food, or sex, or money. And then slowly, these good things can become unmanageable, like binge eating, or pornography addiction, or gambling. A hallmark of addiction is dualistic, all or nothing thinking. And that's not the way that God thinks. But that is what the crowd does, and that's what we're prone to do too. And when our addictions are running the show, we tend to do things like the disciples. Like, under the influence of our addictions, like Judas, we betray our values, our friends, and our families. Like John and James, we go numb and sleepy to our own feelings, truths, griefs, and needs. Like Peter, we can lie to ourselves and others. Or sometimes we might take up the sword and become violent and defensive, irritable or even aggressive, just trapped in cycles of fight or flight. Unlike the crowd, we can totally ignore the good thing God has done in our lives and put God on trial for the chaos that we've created. Like, there is nothing I can't blame God for. But in the midst of this Holy Week tapestry, Jesus shows us another way. He models step 11. Step 11 is this: we sought prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood God, praying only for knowledge of God's will for us and the power to carry it out. So again, we sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood God, praying only for knowledge of God's will for us and the power to carry that out. Interestingly, between Jesus' triumphant arrival in Jerusalem on Palm Sunday and his death on the cross on Good Friday, Jesus goes to pray. And he prays this step 11 prayer. He prays for God's will to be done. Will of God is a rough phrase, and we're going to come back to that in a minute. But first, let's talk about why this step is so important and how it fits into this Lenten journey. If you've been around Salt House for a while, you've heard us quote Richard Rohr a lot. And if you don't know Richard Rohr, he's a Franciscan priest in New Mexico. He's the founder of the Center for Action and Contemplation, and his work has largely looked at recovering mysticism in Christian experience. And a core theory that Rohr works with in almost all of his books is deconstructing dualistic thinking, this black and white thinking, this right or wrong thinking, all or nothing thinking. And Rohr argues that essentially we possess two minds. He calls one of them your thinking mind. This is your mind that understands reading and writing and arithmetic. It's your mind that makes lists and organizes schedules. The mind that worries and stews and gets angry. It's that linear, logical, common sense mind that we glorify in Western white post-Enlightenment culture. But this is also the mind that feeds our addiction. It's the mind that makes spreadsheets. It helps us survive in some situations. We do need this mind, but it's not the mind that leads us to wholeness and healing. Because the thinking mind does the math, and it tells us that we aren't good enough, that we aren't safe enough, that we aren't fun enough, that we aren't worthy enough. And Rohr argues the thinking mind sees everything through the lens of its own private needs, hurts, angers, and memories. It is too small a mind to see things truthfully, wisely, or deeply. The thinking mind sees everything through the lens of its own private needs, hurts, angers, and memories. It is too small a mind to see things truthfully, wisely, or deeply. And Rohr suggests there are 5 things we cannot understand with our thinking mind. They are love, God, death, suffering, and eternity. None of these things can be understood with words, with math, or with lists. I tried to spreadsheet it and it didn't work. And yet people do understand these things. I mean, you can't describe love, but you felt it. You can't describe God. Religions have done a terrible job for thousands of years. But yet people do have experiences of God. The way healing happens in the midst of suffering is impossible to put into words. Most of the time people try, they say really stupid things. And yet people who suffer also heal. Like, how does that happen? Well, Rohr argues that to understand these things, we have to switch our thinking. Instead of thinking with our thinking mind, we have to think with our contemplative mind. The contemplative mind is the divine spark, your soul, the image of God imprinted on you. It's the part of you that is always connected with God, always. And we make this switch through prayer and meditation. Prayer and meditation move us from our own needs, hurts, angers, memories, into something bigger. They move us into the loving heart of God. And often prayer and meditation get juxtaposed against each other. Like, you'll hear people say things like, prayer is talking to God and meditation is listening. Or I think prayer and meditation are similar and different, but also not different. And so we're going to talk just briefly about each. And I'm going to start with meditation because I'm bad at it. Meditation has different contexts and different traditions. I mean, some of you probably love meditation. Anybody? Some of you probably hate meditation. Nobody's willing to fess up to that one. Okay. Thank you, Deb. I admittedly learned to meditate in my undergraduate degree, which was in business administration. And my cost accounting professor, Dr. Newman, opened every class with 2 minutes of meditation. Meditation is pretty much the only thing I remember from cost accounting. But what I learned from Dr. Newman is that meditation is about noticing your thoughts. Not silencing them like we assume, but noticing them. So do this. If it's comfortable, close your eyes. Start with a few deep breaths and see what comes up for you. And perhaps you think about work, and you just tell yourself, I don't need to worry about that right now. I can put that aside. And perhaps you think about your family, and you tell yourself, I love these people. I am grateful for these people. Or maybe you're not. I mean, I don't know your family. But you can put that aside. And then maybe you think about creme brulee. And you're like, well, that's a weird thing to think about. I don't need to think about that right now. But I wonder where that came from. And you can put that aside. And thoughts come, and you notice them, and you get curious about them, and you just spend some time sifting through them. And after you do this for a few days or weeks, perhaps you notice, wow, I am anxious a lot of the time. Or, I worry about my loved ones a lot. Or maybe, COVID is still really on my mind. Maybe I should talk about somebody with that. Or this new obsession with creme brulee, that's weird. You just notice. You can open your eyes. And let me give you an example of why I think noticing is so important with addiction. A couple weeks ago, Ben and I were having a date night, and we decided to share an order of fries. And our entrees came and the fries came. We prayed over our food, and then Ben asked me a question about work. And remember, I'm a workaholic. So I love talking about work. And I started talking about work. And I gave Ben way too much detail about work. And after I finished my story, I realized something. I ate all of the fries. all of them, like every single one. Fry after fry after fry, like a nervous tick that I couldn't stop. And I realized that sometimes, by using work to medicate my fear and validate my self-worth, I create a lot of my own anxiety. Like, I medicate my anxiety by creating a different anxiety. And then I medicate that anxiety with food. It's like I just run in this one cycle of worries to another cycle of worries. I'm a workaholic, and I cope by eating my feelings. And I didn't even know that. Our addictions can take lots of forms. If this series has taught me anything, it's that it's hard to be honest enough with ourselves to see all of the ways we cause our own chaos. But there's another reason why noticing your thoughts is so important. During my chaplaincy rotation at Harborview, our midterm was to give each of our colleagues 2 pieces of criticism. It's a real team bonding experience. It was torture to my inner people pleaser. And there were lots of reasons for this exercise. I mean, part was to get general feedback for our own professional development. Part was to get the experience of initiating uncomfortable conversations, which is something pastors sometimes do. But part of it was also the debrief, because after everyone had given their feedback, Tim, our supervisor, asked us to reflect if these critiques we had of each other were also true of ourselves. And we looked at this theory called parallel process. Parallel process argues that the things we notice and critique in others are often our own insecurities, and that's why we notice them. Richard Rohr talks about this with meditation. He says, most of us don't see things as they are, but we see things as we are. Most of us don't see things as they are, we see things as we are. And meditation gets at this. How do we get to know ourselves? How do we listen to our own inner monologue? How do we notice, not analyze or explain, justify or condemn, but notice our inner world? And how do we stop letting that inner world have the loudest voice? These questions are important because our goal here is, how do we surrender not to our own sense of fear or worthlessness, but how do we surrender to God? And how do we know that those 2 voices sound different? Because when we don't notice what's stirring inside of us, we surrender to the wrong things. Our addictions end up driving the show. Fear takes over, good things become chaos, and bad things sneak into our lives, and we deny their presence. But when we notice, when we get curious about it, when we go inside ourselves, we can meet ourselves. Maybe there are childhood wounds that need to be comforted. Maybe there's a grief that needs to be let out. Maybe there are tears that need to be cried or words that need to be spoken. Maybe there are needs that deserve to be asked for. Maybe there's generational trauma. Maybe there's shame or guilt or fear. Meditation is an invitation not to silence yourself, but to notice what is inside of yourself. Ultimately, to get in touch with that inner spark of the divine, that piece of us that is always connected to God. And this is why Step 11 invites us to pray only for the knowledge of God's will, that place where God is speaking to you. When we quiet the thinking, analyzing, worrying, hurting parts of ourselves, we just might hear it. So now let's talk about prayer. One of Richard Rohr's best, or most famous, I'm going to say his best, most famous quotes is, prayer is not about changing God, but about being willing to let God change us. Prayer is not about changing God, but about being willing to let God change us. Whenever we encounter prayer in the Gospels, we see a theme of surrender. When Mary learns that she's going to conceive a child, she prays, let it be done according to your will. It's as if Mary endows Jesus' entire life with surrender. When he teaches his disciples to pray, he includes this line, thy will be done. When he goes to the garden before his arrest, he prays, not my will, but yours. Rohr translates Jesus' prayer on the cross as, let your will be done unto me. Whenever Jesus models prayer, he models surrender. And this is what Step 11 gets at, because the prayer here is not open-ended. It's not pray for what you need. It's not pray for what hurts you. It's not pray for less anger. It's not pray for those you love or even those you hate. We've addressed those things with other steps, right? This step is exclusively pray only for the knowledge of God's will and power to carry it out. And you know what? That really scares me. I mean, I'm scared of that prayer. Because what if God's will hurts? What if God tests me in some way? What if I can't handle it? Richard Rohr would probably smack me. I mean, he probably wouldn't smack me. I've seen him on Zoom. He doesn't really seem like the smacking type. But he would tell me, all of those questions come from my thinking mind. They come from my desire to understand, to know, to get it right, to feel safe. They don't come from a place of being held in the loving embrace of God. When we surrender, when we give up our addictions, when we stop trying to manage our fears, our defects, or our shortcomings, we may suffer. It may hurt a lot. But the good news of the cross is God is at work in trauma and suffering. God does not require suffering, but God does not run from suffering either. God is found there too. And when we try to determine God's will, we often kill God in our systems of injustice, in our neighbors, and in ourselves. But when we are held in the loving embrace of God, when we stop reacting and living out of our inner worlds, we realize that our prayers are God's prayers. Our desire for justice is God's desire for justice. Our broken hearts are God's broken hearts. Our tears are God's tears. This is what prayer and meditation lead us to. And there's a word in AA groups for when we know our addictions aren't running the show. That word is serenity. Serenity is defined as a feeling of being calm, peaceful, and untroubled with a positive state of mind. Serenity is the opposite of fear. Serenity is the feeling of total surrender, the feeling of knowing that God is with you. Prayer and meditation are the tools of finding serenity, and thy will be done is the path to serenity. So this Holy Week, I'd like to invite you into two practices to explore this step. The first is a prayer. Theologian Reinhard Niebuhr penned the famous serenity prayer that is used by AA groups. And we've actually added this prayer in your bulletin this week. You may have heard it or seen a paraphrased version of it before, but this prayer that's in the bulletin is the entire version. And I invite you to close your eyes for just a minute. And I'm going to read it to you. See what you notice. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, taking this world as it is and not as I would have it, trusting that you will make all things right if I surrender to your will, so that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with you forever in the next. Amen. Hear it again. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, taking this world as it is and not as I would have it, trusting that you will make all things right if I surrender to your will, so that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with you forever in the next. Amen. So take this prayer, and this week, say it daily, maybe several times a day. Perhaps choose a line from it that jumps out to you, and meditate on that line. Use it as a mantra maybe, and then get curious about why that line jumps out to you. Like when I read this, the line, as it is and not as I would have it, jumps out to me. And I can tell you, I would have some things different if I was in charge. But I'm curious, why do I need to be in charge? Why can't I accept the world as it is and trust that God is there in this world as it is too? So use this prayer as a tool to open you up to the loving heart of God, and use it as a tool to invite the knowledge of God's will in your life. Because God's will is mercy, love, healing, and life abundantly. So then the second invitation, make it a priority to be here on Friday for Good Friday worship, either in person or online. Because if we skip Good Friday, we might be corrupted to go from Jesus' military parade to Jesus' resurrection. And this Jesus starts to look a lot like the warrior hero we expect, instead of the crucified God that we need. We have to see Jesus in his suffering on the cross to know that God meets us in our suffering too. So be here for that. And this year we're doing something different for Good Friday. We're going to ask the question, what if Jesus was an addict? What if Jesus had said no? What if Jesus chose his fears instead of surrendering to the will of God? Have you ever asked these questions? Well, we're going to ask them on Friday and see how they play out. So those are two practices for you this week, the Serenity Prayer and our own Good Friday service. 2 ways to practice praying, thy will be done. All right, friends, we made it to Holy Week. We stand on this moment with the crowds of Jerusalem, praying for a Savior, and this week we will kill him. Our defects, our shortcomings, our addictions, we will harm the image of God in our systems. We will harm God in our neighbors, and we will harm God in ourselves. But God will still be there. So as close as the breath in your lungs or the blood in your veins, no worrying, analyzing, hurting, nothing can separate you from this divine heart of God. You just have to surrender. Amen. Amen.